Monkey.
Last time we took a look at A Monkey's Tale, an obscure yet ambitious film about two monkey tribes separated by time and superstition. It had a fantastic English voice cast, but remained a niche memory for many. But what if I told you that 20 years later, director Jean-François Laguionie returned to this world with a follow-up?
Tree World is where we belong, but my heart belongs to the Groundlands.
I'm just joking, it's a film called The Prince's Voyage. Today, we're looking at this unexpected sequel that swaps the adventure of the original for something more philosophical. But is it better? Let's take a look and find out. Taking place right after the original film, the story follows the king who was believed to have drowned, yeah, spoiler alert for the last one, washing ashore in a strange, advanced land. He is discovered by a young monkey named Tom and taken in by his adoptive scientist parents, who have been banished for believing other monkey civilizations exist. From there, the premise flips the original film on its head. Now it's the old king being studied as a primitive specimen in a new world, leading to a philosophical story about civilization and fear of the unknown. As you can probably tell based on how I just described the plot, there is some repetition from the first film, but thankfully, it is mostly limited to the role of the main character. What makes this film especially interesting is the context behind it. Jean-François Laguionie didn't return to make a direct sequel in the traditional sense. This isn't A Monkey's Tale 2. Instead, The Prince's Voyage feels like a filmmaker revisiting his own ideas 20 years later with a very different perspective. This time, Laguionie worked alongside co-writer Annick Leray and co-director Xavier Picard,
Mon capitaine.
bringing in new creative voices while still maintaining his signature style. The film itself took several years to develop, reflecting a slow and deliberate production process that mirrors the film's pacing. This movie was handled by different production studios, including Blue Spirit Productions, known for shows like Blue Eye Samurai and Marvel's What If, as well as movies such as My Life as a Zucchini, which I will absolutely talk about in another video in the near future. They had previously collaborated with Laguionie on one of his previous films, The Painting. They also worked with Mélusine Productions, known for producing several indie animated films such as Ernest and Celestine, as well as collaborating with Cartoon Saloon on movies like Song of the Sea, The Breadwinner, and Wolfwalkers. With a budget of $4.3 million and a team of 200 artists across France and Luxembourg, the film made its world premiere at the Annecy International Animation Film Festival in June 2019, where Laguionie received an honorary Crystal Award for his long career in the industry. If you enjoy deep dives into overlooked animated movies, feel free to like and subscribe. Don't forget to also let me know in the comments what animated film you'd like me to cover next. The most immediately noticeable difference between The Prince's Voyage and A Monkey's Tale lies in the animation. The original film is entirely hand-drawn, whereas this one adopts a hybrid approach, combining 2D aesthetics with 3D production techniques. The film uses cel-shaded CGI models to replicate the look of traditional animation, which allows for more consistent character designs and smoother, more controlled movement. It also enables more dynamic camera work, subtle tracking shots, depth, and perspective that wouldn't be as easy to achieve in purely hand-drawn animation. But there's a trade-off. Whilst everything looks more polished and technically refined, it loses some of the expressive roughness that gave the original film its charm. It feels tighter, more controlled. That said, the backgrounds are still absolutely gorgeous. These are hand-painted 2D environments, rich in texture and detail, and they do a lot of heavy lifting in maintaining the film's artistic identity. There's also the addition of simulated fur, which is a pretty big technical step for the studio and adds a layer of realism to the characters. Visually, the film follows what you might call the French school of animation: soft desaturated colours, careful composition, and a focus on atmosphere over spectacle. The animation is more advanced, no doubt about that, but in becoming more precise, it also becomes more restrained, mirroring the film's overall shift in tone. Compared to A Monkey's Tale, this film has a much smaller and more focused cast. The original leaned heavily on familiar archetypes: the rebellious hero, the diabolical villain, the comic relief, whilst The Prince's Voyage strips all of that back in favour of something more minimal. But that also means the characters work very differently. They're not really written as fully fleshed out individuals, instead they function more like ideas. The king, who I'll just refer to as the prince from now on, is easily the most compelling. He's still charming, still curious, but now there's a sense of age to him. He's not driving the story, He's observing it, questioning it, trying to understand it. It's actually a really nice reversal compared to Com in the first film. Though one tiny thing I'll mention, and this is absolutely a nitpick, but if you take the first film into account, it's really strange how he never mentions his ill daughter. Com gets referenced on at least one occasion, so why not his own child?
My daughter!
Tom, on the other hand, represents openness. He hasn't fully absorbed the rigid beliefs of his society yet, which makes him the perfect bridge between worlds. His parents represent truth, specifically the kind of truth that society refuses to accept, though both characters use their research for very different reasons. Elizabeth is a botanist who tries to use her knowledge against nature itself despite her better judgment, whilst Professor Victor wants to use what he's learned from the prince to restore his reputation and be accepted back into higher society. Both seek validation, but have very different and desperate means of achieving it. One is selfless, despite her cold exterior, whilst the other is more selfish, hidden behind a warmer disposition. And then you have the institutions, the academy, the authorities, which represent control, fear, and denial. Unlike the first film, where they just used a simple power-hungry individual as the villain of the story, instead, it's higher society itself that's the main threat here. All the characters are clearly established, but at a slight cost. They're not always emotionally engaging. Outside of the prince and Tom, it's hard to really connect with anyone on a deeper level. They serve more as functions rather than fully three-dimensional characters. As cliched as many of the characters of the first film were, they were at least memorable and distinct. The characters serve the film's ideas perfectly, don't get me wrong, but it's kind of a shame that they don't feel as real as they should. The themes are where the film really shines. At its core, The Prince's Voyage is about curiosity, and what happens when a society loses it. The world of the film doesn't just ignore the possibility of other civilizations, it actively rejects it. And that idea alone opens the door to a lot of interpretation. You can read it as a commentary on xenophobia, on nationalism, on the fear of the unknown. But it also goes deeper than that. The film explores how knowledge is controlled, how institutions decide what is acceptable truth and what isn't, and more importantly, how people go along with that, even when the evidence is right in front of them. There's also a strong contrast between nature and industrial society. The city is rigid, mechanical, and controlled, whilst the natural world feels unpredictable, but alive. And like A Monkey's Tale, the film doesn't fully romanticize either side. It just asks what we lose when we prioritize control over understanding. It's a movie less interested in telling a story, and more interested in asking uncomfortable questions, and that is where it's at its strongest. But as strong as the ideas are, the execution doesn't always hold up. The biggest issue is pacing. This is a slow film, and not just thoughtful slow. There are moments where scenes linger a bit too long, where the story feels like it's barely moving forward. And because the narrative itself is fairly thin, that slowness becomes more noticeable. A lot of the story feels like it exists just to support the themes, rather than standing on its own. You can often predict where things are going, and there's not a lot of tension to keep you hooked. Some side plots also feel underdeveloped. Elizabeth, for example, who looks way too much like Nurse Ratched, is set up as this major figure trying to fight back against the encroaching forest, but her storyline just kind of stops, outside of a line of dialogue towards the end. And then there's the messaging. The film isn't subtle at all. Everything is very clearly laid out, which works for clarity, but it also makes the film feel a bit heavy-handed at times. The ideas are strong, but the storytelling doesn't always match them, leaving the film feeling more like a concept than a fully realised narrative. So before I conclude this video, I might as well ask the question, which film is better? Honestly, it depends on what you're looking for. A Monkey's Tale is the more accessible film. It has a clearer structure, more engaging pacing, and a stronger sense of adventure. It's easier to watch, easier to enjoy, and probably easier to recommend. But it's also more predictable. It follows familiar beats, leans into typical tropes, and occasionally throws in things like songs and comedy that feel a bit out of place. The Prince's Voyage, on the other hand, is more ambitious. It's more thoughtful, more atmospheric, and a lot more interesting to analyse. But it's also slower, less emotionally engaging, and not nearly as satisfying on a narrative level. One invites you to explore its world, the other asks you to question it. Personally, I think A Monkey's Tale is the more entertaining film, but The Prince's Voyage is the one that sticks with you. They're not really competing, they're complementing each other, showing two very different sides of the same creative vision. So where does that leave The Prince's Voyage? It's definitely not an easy watch. It's slower, quieter, and far less immediately engaging than A Monkey's Tale. And yeah, there are moments where it drags, where the characters feel more like ideas than people, and where the story doesn't quite land the way it should. But at the same time, it's kind of refreshing. Because this isn't a film trying to entertain you every second, it's not trying to be bigger or more exciting than what came before. If anything, it does the opposite. It pulls back, it simplifies, it asks you to sit with it. And the more I think about it, the more I respect that. There's something genuinely admirable about a film that's this committed to its ideas, even when it doesn't fully succeed. It feels personal, like Jean-François Laguionie coming back to something he made years ago and asking, do I still believe this? And that gives the film a kind of honesty that you don't always see. So yeah, despite its flaws, this is absolutely a film I'd recommend. Not necessarily for everyone, but definitely for anyone interested in animation that tries to do something a little different. Because even if it doesn't always work, it's still worth experiencing. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to like and subscribe, it really helps the channel. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.